Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Megan McDonald. I'm the Public Relations Manager at CBIA. For those of you who were with us last time, thanks so much for joining us again. For those of you who it's your first time with us on our cybersecurity webinar series, thanks for joining us. In the next 45 minutes or so, you'll get a blueprint for a plan that includes identifying gaps in your security, protecting your information, detecting attacks, responding to an attack, and recovering your data. Thanks to AT&T, BlumShapiro, Cooperative Services, and KeyBank for their generous sponsorship, making it possible to offer these sessions to our members, yourselves, free of charge. Just a little bit of housekeeping for today's webinar. The format will be a slide presentation on your screen with voiceover commentary from our presenter. We plan to answer questions at the end of today's presentation, and we encourage you to ask them using the text box on the right-hand side of your screen. There are two text boxes, one for administrative matters and the other for posing questions to our presenter via texting function. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be posted to CBIA's website for later viewing by you or others in your organization who you think might benefit from the material. We will be sending out an email within the next few days to all attendees with a link to the event recording online and on CBIA's website, and as well as a link to the PDF of this presentation. The presenter's contact information will also be posted within the material should you wish to follow up further with him for more information. And now to introduce today's presenter. As a partner in BlumShapiro's consulting group, Jeff Ziplow is responsible for the firm's risk management and process controls practice areas. He has significant experience working with organizations to assess their internal IT controls as they relate to business operations and helps to develop recommendations to mitigate risk. He oversees the firm's cybersecurity risk assessments and provides insight and guidance on developing better security practices. In addition, he works on process and control-related projects to enhance operational efficiencies and provide tangible control recommendations. So I'm going to pass it off to Jeff now, and like I said, questions will be at the end, but please go ahead and post them throughout if you have one you don't want to forget. Thanks so much. Take it away, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Megan. I want to welcome everyone to our second in our series of webinars on cybersecurity. And what I'd like to do with you today is share with you some thoughts about what's going on with cybersecurity, but equally important, some things to consider when thinking about your own organization and how to protect it. What I'd like to do is go over, the agenda very quickly. So we're going to talk about employees and their role in helping or hurting you as it relates to cybersecurity. Look at security programs. Certainly, data protection is an important topic. We can't forget about policies and procedures, and we'll spend a bit of time on an incident response plan for those of you who want to be proactive in understanding how you can protect yourself. What I thought we would do first, though, is talk a little bit about some statistics. From my perspective, there is a number of ways that we're being attacked. One of the ways is certainly phishing, and we're going to get into some detail and depth on phishing. But one of my bullet points here is, 10% of phishing emails yield a 90% chance that at least one person clicks a malicious link. We are being bombarded with, over 1.5 million pieces of malware every day. Part of that malware is phishing emails, spear phishing emails that are directed to a particular person. And so we need to be cognizant of this. We need to understand the risks. We also need to understand what we need to do to protect ourselves. I am also seeing many, many more board members raising the issue of cybersecurity. And attending a lot of these boards, we're seeing a lot of concerns about what is my organization that I represent doing to help protect us as a whole, as a group. There's a misconception out there that hackers go in and they go out. relatively quickly. Frankly, that's just the opposite. What we're seeing is, on average, hackers are spending, about 150 days. In some instances, it's much, much more, up to a couple of years within someone's network without anyone noticing. So that gives them time to explore, to look at. We'll get into some of the Equifax discussions in a bit. But certainly, once they're in, they're going to stay there for as long as they can. And unfortunately, in this last statistic, from my perspective and from others, most organizations are not prepared for a cybersecurity incident. What do I do? How do I do it? And what can I do to protect myself? So let's get into some other discussions about the trends. It is a well-organized cyber terrorists, cyber crimes. It's well-organized. They're technically advanced. And as I mentioned earlier, they're going to go in and look for information, and they're after data, and we'll get into some of the elements of the data they're looking for. But they're in there for the long term. As long as they don't get caught, they're going to be in your systems trying to extract as much information as possible. I thought I would spend just a moment or two on the Equifax incident. We've all heard about it. There's no doubt that it is a significant issue that we all need to be thinking about. 143 million Americans, and quite frankly, I think that number has gone up by a couple million, have had sensitive data exposed. And one of the biggest concerns about this particular cyber incident is two pieces of information. One is the Social Security number. The other one is the date of birth. And the reason I bring those two topics up for discussion is those pieces of information never change. And as you move around, you get different addresses. You might even get different license numbers. You might even change your name, but typically your date of birth and your Social Security never change. So we can be seeing, or my guess is we will be seeing this information that was exposed impacting us for many years to come, not just in the 2 or 3 years out, but as much as 5, 10, maybe even 15 years out, because the Social Security number and date of birth don't change. I'm also going to go on a limb and suggest that although they did represent that the breach lasted from mid-May to the end of June in 2017, I'm going to predict that when we get our arms around the entire breach, it's going to be much longer, and it'll have gone way past or way earlier than mid-May, because I think ultimately the amount of information that was collected, it had to take a bit of time to collect. What we have learned is that the breach was due to a vulnerability in software, and because something wasn't patched appropriately. Just recently, I went out and I was looking at other cyber incidences, and I saw, Verizon had a 14 million record breach, Bell Atlantic 19 million. We mentioned Equifax. We talk about Virgin America Airlines had 3,120 employees breached. Deloitte was recently breached. So we're seeing more and more incidents. People want information. They want to sell the information. And ultimately, that's where they make their profit and money. So how can we protect you and your environment, your company from data breaches? I would submit to you that one of the best ways to do it is with your employees. So when you look at employees, they're your shortest path, if you will, to compromise. They can be your best. When educated, they can be a tremendous asset. When they're not informed, they can be one of your worst. It can be a significant liability. And what I mean by that is, our employees are going to be attacked by phishing emails. They're going to be attacked by spear phishing. They're going to be, people are going to be calling them up, asking for information, sometimes personal information. And those employees, if they know what to do, they can be your greatest asset. They're the first line of defense. They can identify incidents quickly. They can escalate them to the appropriate people. They can talk to other workers about what's going on. And most importantly, they can be your biggest advocate for internal security. When something doesn't make sense, they can raise those issues to the appropriate folks within your organization, to a third-party vendor, internal IT department, even to the president, to say something doesn't make sense. And so really understanding and providing training to those employees is really important. Some information about employees: 1/3 of the attacks that we're seeing is attributable to the inadvertent actor. Employees that didn't intentionally want to give up information, well-meaning employees that were attacked typically through phishing attacks or other type of social engineering. Social engineering is when you get a phone call from someone to give some personal information, user ID and password, and it starts the ball rolling forward. Malicious emails are also part of these campaigns. A lot of the ransomware that we've heard about and seen recently is a result of malicious emails coming through, and we're giving out information inadvertently that shouldn't be given out, quite frankly. Moving on to the next slide. What I wanted to do is talk a little bit about what trends we're seeing. These are all, we've heard about the phishing and the spear phishing. There are other types of phishings going on, if that's a word. There's smishing with texting, mining social media. There's a wealth of information out on the internet that will help identify personal information about a person so that we can get some additional valuable information, social security number being one, date of birth certainly being another one as well. Nearly 70% of all the cyber attacks are coming through right now, at least initially through email, through phishing. A number of the high-profile cyber attacks have been a result of a phishing exercise where a user gave their user ID and password to an outside attacker, disclosed it and submitted it because they thought they were talking to the IT department that were asking or requesting confirmation of their user ID and password. And as a result, they were able to use that user ID and password and gain access into various systems so that they could go in and start exploring, looking, trying to identify where the key databases are, opening up the network doors, if you will, or the virtual doors, and identifying key issue or key opportunities to collect and obtain information. So just to share with you some common signs of phishing, I thought this was a great example, and we'll actually show you some real live phishing examples in a minute. Poor grammar and spelling is certainly an indicator, if you will, that this email that we just received might not be the most appropriate, or it might be coming from an outside cyber hacker, if you will. Requests for personal or sensitive information is another indicator. In urgency, that you need to respond within a particular time frame is certainly another issue. Discussing or providing confidential information. just recently, actually this year, one of the school districts in Connecticut was compromised because what ended up happening is an outside attacker posing as the superintendent of the school system sent an email requesting W-2 information. Again, Social Security information and other private information. And this person responded in providing that list to the person requesting it. And when confronting the superintendent, unfortunately the superintendent had no idea and had not actually requested the information. So there were hundreds of W-2s that escaped this particular school district. We need to be very vigilant. We need to exercise caution when people are asking about and requesting personal information of any sort. And what I've been telling everyone is I really believe in the traditional phone system. If it doesn't make sense, if someone is asking you to provide confidential information, my best recommendation can be pick up the phone and call someone. Say, I just need to confirm that this is what you're looking for. And in many instances, it might not be the case. Here's some real examples. You can see here in this example of an Amazon phishing email. If you look at the top, it's not coming from Amazon. It's not an Amazon email address. In the body of the email, you'll see that it's Dear Client. It's not to a specific person. It's very generic. And then a key to a lot of these links, if you will, if you look at the middle of the body, you'll see that it looks like there's a link coming from Amazon. But if you were to hover over that, you'll see on the screen, when you hover over it, that it is a non-Amazon site, and it's actually being redirected to a different site that doesn't make any sense. Another example, here's a good PayPal example. They're confirming some information. They're asking you, to update the information regarding your quote-unquote PayPal account. They want you to log in, and what's going to happen is when you log in, they're going to ask for your user ID and password credentials. And ultimately, that's the starting point of how attackers, cybersecurity attackers, are capturing information that they can use in order to get more information, not only about you, but about the organization. So they can create a link into the organization through your credentials to start exposing and capturing information. There's also a spelling mistake here. Again, goes to the point that if it doesn't look right, it probably isn't right. The last one on my list is, make sure that you're going to a URL that makes sense. The URL, if it's a PayPal account, if it's an Amazon account, that's what it should say here. In this instance, you're seeing a number underneath, or when I hover over that link. Clearly, that doesn't make sense to me, and that's that's an IP address, but that's some number that is not associated with, a PayPal or an Amazon. Be careful. And the other thing you want to look for is HTTPS in the link, and what that means is it means it's a secure site, which does help in the transmission and security of data that goes back and forth. If you're providing any type of PI, personal information, to any website, you should make sure that the website has that HTTPS in the upfront part of the URL to help ensure that you're using a protected site. Attachments. This is a key one. I'm always concerned about any attachments that I receive. There's a philosophy in my mind: think first, click last. Do not click on attachments. Matter of fact, I would tell you that if you don't know who that email is coming from and it has an attachment, I would delete it. I think it's too often we're getting all these phishing emails with attachments. Attachments can contain malware that can be loaded up on your PC and it can do damage. It could be part of a ransomware attack. It could be part of a piece of software called a keylogger that will capture all your keystrokes, including user IDs and passwords, and behind the scenes, it can be sent out onto the internet to the cyber attackers, and they can use that information to get into systems that you have been in. So what I always tell people, and what I think is very important to think about, is if you don't know who that email is coming from and it has an attachment, I typically do not click on it. And I would certainly ask IT if they can open up an email with an attachment in a protected environment, so it doesn't expose you, your PC, or your organization and put you in an awkward situation. So what do? Employee training, I think, is imperative. I don't believe that we do enough employee training at this point in time. We need to make employees aware of their role, obligation, their accountability as it relates to cybersecurity. What I've been hearing is we will talk to employees on an informal basis about cybersecurity. What I am suggesting, and what I think is very important, is to have some type of ongoing training program for employees. And matter of fact, in some organizations that do provide some level of training just in general operations, I would certainly recommend incorporating some type of cybersecurity training as part of it. It doesn't have to be a half-day session. A half hour to an hour of talking about and having your employees understand what they need to be looking out for, what they can do to protect not only themselves, but the company as a whole. And they can be your best advocates of having a good cybersecurity program, and they're the ones that can certainly help protect your organization, protect the data within your organization, and equally important, recognize if you may be under an attack. And I always recommend that, at least twice a year, if not on a quarterly basis, we provide employees with a refresher. Hey, be on the lookout for this. These are things that we've been hearing. These are things that we've been seeing. I have to imagine everyone on this phone call has had some type of phishing incident, maybe a spear phishing incident where an email was received and it looked like it was coming from the president, but in fact it was coming from the outside. Everything probably sounded like it was the CEO requesting for a wire transfer, but in the end, we need to think, we need to test it out, and I go back to what I had said earlier. If you're ever in doubt, I would pick up the phone and just make sure that what that person requesting is, in fact, it's coming from that individual and it's something that they have requested. So let me move on off of employees and phishing into another topic, which is your infrastructure. We all have, or many of us have, networks in place. Most of us have, if not all of us, have firewalls. We have servers. We have computers hooked up to the network. Infrastructures are something that we typically all have to deal with. One of the things that we need to take precautions on is how cyber attacks are happening today. And one of the big ways that they're happening is we're not updating the software, the operating systems, or other software that is maintained on servers or on your PCs, even on your firewalls. The Equifax situation, there was a piece of software that sat on some servers that was not updated in a timely manner. And again, we'll learn more about it. But the reason that we're receiving patches, or that we get patches with some frequency, is that someone has exposed either a bug or a hole in that software, so that someone could go in and be able to get in or push away the security and get into our network through a firewall, through a server, through a PC, and attack us with the ultimate goal to get information. One of the other things that I've seen very recently, and when we've been going through some of our cybersecurity assessments, is that many times with various devices like a firewall, it typically will come in with some standard passwords, default passwords. And what we've been seeing is many organizations haven't changed those default passwords. And as a result, if I can get into your firewall and I can ping it, I can identify that IP address and identify or go into it and use a default password, user ID and password, now I've gained access into your firewall, which would then allow me to gain access into your network. So one of the things that we need to be asking our network administrators or our third-party vendors is, have all of the default passwords been changed? Have they been changed to a level of complexity that makes sense for our organization? We've also seen a number of instances where PCs are either missing or haven't had updates to their antivirus or spyware software. Again, doing these type of vulnerability assessments, I would say 9 times out of 10, there's that one PC that for some reason never got an update. Don't know why, don't know how it happened or how it was missed, but we really need to be very vigilant and ensure that we have all of these updates on the computers, on our servers, on our firewalls, and any other devices that are out there to help protect us. It's going to become more and more important. It's certainly a way for hackers to get in. I would also share with you that if you're using Microsoft Server 2003 or Microsoft Windows that is not up to, not Windows 10, but Windows 7 or XP, particularly XP, you need to make sure, particularly at the XP or Server 2003 level, that you're going to discontinue use of that equipment, because there are no more patches that are coming out from Microsoft. They've pushed off, or they basically said that those operating systems were no longer going to patch and provide security for. I believe there are still some organizations out there that have it, that are using it, and do your best to be on not necessarily the bleeding edge of the software operating systems, but certainly get off ones that are no longer supported. One of the questions that I'm asked continually is, well, passwords. I have a ton of passwords. And Jeff, how do I handle all of these passwords? What are some good practices and standards? And how can I protect not only myself, but my organization as it relates to passwords? What I want to share with you is, and I provided you with a list of passwords to avoid. So these were the 25 most common passwords of 2016. And I'm hoping that if we were able to do a quick survey of all the attendees on this webinar, your password is not there. If it is, please change it, and I would say please change it accordingly. We have seen, and in doing assessments, we actually go in and we try some of these passwords, and undoubtedly we'll find one or two situations where these passwords actually do work. The other thing that we're finding as it relates to passwords, because people are storing and have so many different passwords for so many different systems, one of the things that we're seeing is people are writing down these passwords and they're putting it up on their monitor in their office or underneath keyboards. And certainly, as you could imagine, not a great business practice to have. And if indeed that's what you are doing, I would certainly recommend not doing it, because, and also putting it in your top drawer at your desk, not a good practice as well. I'm suggesting this only because, particularly if you have folks who are going into your office during the day or at night, they could see it, they could share it, and certainly not what I would call a best business practice in any way, shape, or form. So there's a website I wanted to share with you. It's called How Secure Is My Password? On the screen, and it gives you, how to go to it. And if you put in a password, it will tell you how quick it could recognize, how quickly your password could be cracked. And we put in, I believe it's an 8-digit password, and it would crack it in 2 minutes. What I do want to share with you is I would put in a sample of what your real password is just to check it out. I wouldn't put in what your real password is in this site. But I do want to share with you some tips. Some tips for better passwords and creating better passwords. So what I typically do is I don't use any type of dictionary words or combination of words. What I would do is I would create a complex password using a memorable phrase or a term or something that makes sense to you. So here I have in front of you, excuse me, I love watching the New England Patriots on Sunday, and you can see how I've taken that phrase and turned it into a non-dictionary word that has upper and lowercase characters and also has special characters. And again, you wouldn't find this in any dictionary anywhere. And just to share with everyone, no, that is not my password. But it is a sample of a password that I use, and I think many of us will use to help protect and secure our password in the best way possible. You'll also notice that it is, has some significant size to it. So there's, a total of, I think it's 10 characters, 10 or 12 characters. Not a bad. I think what I'm trying to say is we want it, the longer the better. And I'm going to show you something in just a minute, just to share with you, how long it takes to crack passwords. We're also being asked to respond to security questions. And here's some sample security questions that I have seen in a number of websites. What's your pet's name? And typically you put, Buffy or Bula or Rocky, whatever your password's name, high school, favorite movie. So one of the things they're looking for is just a response. They're not vetting that this is a true pet's name or a true high school or a true favorite movie. So one of the things to consider is putting in a standard term. So blue jumping jacks. Makes no sense, has no significance to a pet's name, has no significance to a high school or a favorite movie, I don't believe. But it does make some sense to you, and it's a way of putting in a response that no one else could or would guess, and a way to enhance security. I can go out on the internet and I can certainly find out what high school you went to. I can certainly, if you identify your favorite movie in any one of the social media environments, I might be able to find that and your pet's name. But if I use a standard security term that has some length to it that makes no sense, I believe we're better off from a security perspective. The last slide on security is, what does it take to crack some of these passwords? What I thought was interesting is a 6-character password takes 12 seconds. 7 characters, 5 minutes. 8 characters, 4 hours. 12 characters, you can see what the number is. It's pretty extensive. So it's 7.5 roughly million years. I keep on talking about the longer the better. So one of the things that I've certainly shared with our clients, and I used to say we need to change our passwords every 60 to 90 days. I'm starting to take a step back from that and saying that we can have, if we introduce longer passwords, and I would say a minimum of 12 to 15 characters, we can extend the rate of password changes to 90 to 180 days. What we're concerned about is the ability for someone to, crack these passwords, and if we're using 12 to 15 characters, it certainly would take quite a bit of time. However, my caveat there is they need to be complex passwords, meaning a combination of upper and lowercase and special characters and numbers. So when we combine all of that together, I think we can create better and more secure passwords overall. I suspect many of you are using the cloud and are using services in the cloud, have your own applications in the cloud. Certainly, we've seen a number of people who have email in the cloud. The cloud is a good thing. Most, I can't say all, but most vendors have put into place some pretty good high-level security, and in most instances, better security than many of the smaller companies could put into place. Some, IDS, identity detection type of systems, some real proactive type of sensor and monitoring devices that will identify if there are problems that exist. So these cloud vendors most of them have put in place some really good security measures. But I think it's also important, how do we know that? How do we go and ask one of our cloud vendors how secure they are? And once the data is in their site, how are they securing it? What type of protocols do they use to protect it? And how can I confirm that my company's data is secure? One of the things that you should be asking your cloud vendors is, do you have a SOC 1 or a SOC 2? And I will explain what those are. The AICPA has identified some security standards, and what happens is an independent outside organization will go into that cloud vendor under the SOC 1 standard or the SOC 2 standard and do an independent audit, if you will, of their security practices and procedures. It's an actual attestation, or someone, an independent organization would go in and have an opinion whether or not they actually meet certain standards that management says, we do this, and the independent outside organization would say, yes, they do this, this is how they secure your information, and actually test it, or not. And so that opinion would tell you, is it a clean opinion or not a clean opinion? There's some other standards out there. There's an ISO standard 9002 that can be used to assess a cloud vendor's security. NIST has a number, NIST, which is a quasi-federal agency that has a cybersecurity framework and has other security models in place to assess networks against. But a SOC 1 and SOC 2 are certainly good indicators of how your information is being protected. Some other questions that you should ask is, what are the security protocols? And what I mean by that is the vendor can provide you, and you might have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, but they can provide you with the actual audit report, the SOC 1 report or SOC 2 report that was generated to validate what their security protocols are and that there's a clean opinion. And if you haven't asked your cloud vendor, you should. If they don't have a SOC 1 or a SOC 2 or some type of ISO assessment, it's highly recommended, and you can certainly push them to get one. And if you're going through an assessment of different cloud vendors that are offering similar services, and one has a SOC 2 audit and one does not, you may want to really consider going with that SOC 2, the vendor that has SOC 2, primarily because they're the ones that have, and hopefully they have a clean opinion, but they're the ones who are taking security, raising the bar for security. They're the ones who have certain practices in place that are being audited against, and they can secure, your information very easily and quickly. And they have those protocols in place. Another question to ask is, who owns the information and data? We assume that, with any vendor, cloud vendor that we're using, that we assume that, it's our information, but your contract and agreement should actually validate that and confirm that. Cyber insurance, becoming very popular. Big question is, do they have cyber insurance? I guess another question to ask is, do you have your own cyber insurance above and beyond the cloud vendor? And that's a discussion for another day. But the right cyber insurance is good to have. It can help protect and insulate the organization and certainly protect you. The last question is a biggie. If there is an incident, who's responsible for reporting it? In the state of Connecticut, and in most of the states within the continental U.S., there are certain requirements, both at a state and federal level, if you get compromised, if there's an incident, if there's a cyber attack of any means or any sort. And the question at hand is, who's responsible? Who's responsible for reporting it? Who's ultimately responsible for the breach? Is it the cloud vendor or is it you? And those types of discussions should certainly happen prior to signing any type of agreement, and it should be well documented as to who is the responsible party. Data. I put up here the data that folks are looking for, our hackers or any cyber instances, payroll data, financial data, intellectual property. We really haven't talked about that, but there have been many known instances above and beyond the typical social security number, date of birth information, personal data, where we're collecting IP, intellectual property, where it's being stolen. A lot in the manufacturing environment, where we have proprietary schematics of parts that have been stolen in the past. And so we certainly need to protect this information, and we need to do everything we can to protect this information. I think one of the questions we need to ask ourselves is, what information do we have that needs to be protected? And when we go in and we talk to clients, a number of times they'll say, oh, we only have our employee information and here's how we protect it. But as you peel back the onion and start looking at the information that needs to be protected, many organizations and companies have a wealth of information that they need to be protected, but they're actually not protecting. And so one of the things that I would certainly recommend to everyone on today's webinar is conduct your own data inventory. What kind of data exists? Is it confidential? Is it not? Where does it exist? How is it protected? Who has access to it? And then we can start having a conversation. Is it encrypted? Is it encrypted while it's in transit? Is it encrypted at rest? These are questions that all of us should be asking ourselves and how we can protect data that we have that needs to be protected. I would suggest and submit to you that 80% of the people that I work with have never gone through, I'll call it a formal data inventory. It's all we assume, but if you get past the assuming part, what you find is, and when you go through a fairly thorough analysis, you've got a lot more data than you really think of. And we've been working with firms that, we've been told they don't store, as an example, credit card information, but ultimately they do. They do it inadvertently, but they have credit card information. They have banking information. And if you do have it, we need to either get rid of it or we need to find ways to protect it. I think another piece of this is documented policies and procedures and knowing what policies and procedures exist, and also ensuring that your employees recognize that these policies and procedures exist and what those data security protocols are. And equally important, we need to make sure that we limit, if there is PI, personal information, confidential information, we need to protect who has access to it. And we should be using this concept of least privilege. If you don't need it, you shouldn't have access to it. We also need to be thinking about vendors and vendors who might have access to our network. And what access do they have not only to our network but to the information on our network? Because ultimately we could be at risk via vendors. And there have been situations where a vendor has been compromised, and because of that compromise, they've been able to get into a larger company's network environment. That was the case of Home Depot. My next slide is a little bit more definition on policies and procedures. It really is important to have a written information security program. And what it is just talking about what our policies are, what our patching policies are, how to update how and the frequency that we update our servers, PCs, firewalls, and what our password policies are, and what we do for storing and protecting personal information. As part of those policies and procedures, we should have a disaster recovery and business continuity plan. Not only should we have a documented plan, but we also need to make sure that it's a tested plan. And I certainly recommend it being tested annually, if not semi-annually. Having a bring your own device. We didn't spend much time on some of the risks, but certainly one of the risks is cell phones and our iPhones and our Android phones. We need to have a policy by which if you're going to allow emails and other attachments and files to be stored on our cell phone, we want to have a policy in place that allows us to, in the event that a cell phone, iPhone or Android phone were stolen, that we can wipe that phone. That needs to be part of a bring your own device policy. I did want to spend a minute or two on incident response. Incident response has these 5 areas: preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery. Those are, I'll call it, the common, 5 areas that should be addressed in any type of incident response plan. But the first one, I think, that really needs to be dealt with is preparation. It needs to be documented. You need to build a team. You need to confirm who's part of that team and key contacts, who needs to be contacted in the event of some type of incident, and what does that incident prevention as well as response plan look like. Having a plan in place before you need to use it is a much better plan. So with that, what I'd like to do, and I know we're winding down on time here, but I'd like to share with you, my top 10 best cybersecurity practices. The first one, and I believe this to the core, is cybersecurity is not just an IT issue. It's a company-wide, organization-wide issue that needs to be addressed at the highest level, not just at the IT level. I do believe that an organization, a company, should look at some type of risk assessment, security risk assessment, cyber risk assessment, whether it's be performed internally or externally. Having it performed and identifying gaps will give you a good way of looking at the challenges that your organization has as it relates to cybersecurity. Enforcing regular password changes. Here's where, I've been saying we should be doing it with some frequency. I'm starting to change my tune, quite frankly, because we have so many passwords. If we just extend the length, we could extend how quickly we have to change. But one of the things I do recommend is, after 3 to 5 unsuccessful attempts, I would certainly lock out that account. If you have the opportunity to use two-factor authentication, I would certainly recommend using it. Ensuring that you have a good, solid backup and recovery process in place, and that you know that it'll work effectively is key and critical, specifically if you run into a ransomware attack or problem. Making sure your antivirus and spyware is working is up to date. We didn't spend much time on wireless, but this is one of the places where a lot of the wireless units have a standard default user ID and password, and they should be changed. Not only should, they must be changed, because we can, as outside consultants, outside hackers, go in and expose your organization to risk because those defaults are still sitting out there. One of the last 2 points I do want to make before we end our session is the concept of encryption. I strongly suggest that all laptops and removable devices be encrypted. It's really important. You have a very different conversation with the AG's office if your laptop is encrypted versus if your laptop wasn't encrypted and you had potential sensitive information on it. And that goes with removable devices as well. And lastly, and a point of emphasis that I started out with earlier on in my presentation, training employees on cybersecurity. When in doubt, delete the email. Don't click on that button. And ultimately, you'll have a much safer environment if we train our employees and expose them to potential issues and concerns that these hackers are pushing on us on a regular basis. So with that, I will end my presentation and certainly will answer any questions that anyone has.
All right, great. Jeff, thank you so much. That was so informative, and I hope that everybody who was participating really enjoyed that information, because it's really valuable, critical stuff these days. do have a couple of questions here. First, I wanted to ask, and I think this is a good one because I think sometimes people underestimate, if they're a small business, how much they really need to be involved with cybersecurity. So this first question is asking, I'm a two-person company. I have two computers. You know, am I still vulnerable to cybersecurity, or are they looking to hack my much larger counterparts?
Hackers are looking for anyone. So whether you're a two-person firm or a 2,000-person firm, you're still at risk. A 2,000-person firm might have more information, but a two-person firm still has key information that they may be storing on behalf of their customers. And the impact to the two-person firm if their customer information was hacked might actually have a greater impact to them than the 2,000 person company.
Yeah, great. Here's a question here. How do you encrypt a laptop? Is it software, or is it something else you have to buy?
So there is a number of encryptions. It's typically done by software encryption. If you're using Windows, and by the way, I'm not promoting it, but if you're using Windows 10 Professional, you actually have encryption software on it right now. It's called the BitLocker, and all you really need to do is go in and enable it, and you can encrypt it immediately. Mac computers, particularly the latest version of the Mac operating system, also have their own encryption built in, and I believe in today's environment, when you get a Mac laptop, it is automatically enabled. I could be wrong on that, but I do know that they do have the encrypted software on those devices.
Okay, great. Another question, and I think that you mentioned it right at the end again, educating employees. Is there a best way to train them? I know that there are online providers, or people can come into the office and kind of walk through. If you have a computer lab that people can work in, do you find that one way is more effective than others?
I would say there's two ways. One is face-to-face, and bringing employees in and having a face-to-face meeting with them, and talking about the ways that our organization and other organizations are being attacked, where the susceptibility is, particularly in the phishing and spear phishing. So face-to-face certainly is a good way, and I've seen many more organizations move forward in that direction. Another way is using some tools that are out there that have the ability to create phishing campaigns, but it's phishing campaigns that will identify those individuals that need more training. And so there's some software tools that are out there. One is something called KnowBe4, and you can actually create a campaign for your company, and that campaign would go out, send an email out to the employees, and you'd be able to identify those employees that clicked on it. So you create what I'll call a baseline, and then you can provide some training either online or face-to-face, and then you can do another similar type of campaign to see how effective that training was. So there's a couple different ways to hit it, but I think one thing that we all need to agree on is our employees need to be trained and need to understand their role in helping to secure our company's data.
Okay, great. What a neat tool. I've heard of Know before. I know that we've actually used that here at CBIA, but to create the campaign to find your baseline is actually a really sort of genius idea there. Yeah. So we're right up at 12 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead. I don't see any more questions coming through, but Jeff's information's there on the screen, and people will have access to this PDF and a recording of this presentation, if not later today, then within the next day or two. I want to thank everyone for staying on with us today. A lot of you stayed on right until the end. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much, Jeff, for your valuable information. It was a great presentation, and I know that 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 presentation.